done deal. But the rest of the day agenda is up for discussion. And here's somebody that can talk about some angles on that.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. If you follow what's going on with the news, you know that the divorce case that went to the federal court to Detroit went to the appellate court, Sixth Circuit, and now it's before the Supreme Court. Ironically, one of the most liberal states in the country that does not have same-sex marriage is going to be the state that doesn't have same-sex marriage, which is taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. Ironic. But I'm actually talking to you a little bit about a different scope of where I come from. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor since I was in my 20s. I'm going to turn 50 this year. And what I've always never understood is how either side, whether it be liberals or conservatives, believe that somehow they own government control of churches. It's a really bizarre phenomenon where you see groups that believe that somehow the majority rules, what I call mob rule mentality. And if you read our Constitution, you understand pretty quickly that the idea is not mob rule. And it's really kind of scary if you read over the First Amendment and you see the free exercise clause, and then you read the 14th Amendment, which talks about liberty, which is an interesting perspective, all the way into the 14th Amendment. We have this situation where we're going, how is it that we have anything to do with marriage in our laws telling us who can and cannot get married? Now, I'm actually going to read you a section of the marriage law that's in Michigan. And kind of want to read it to you out loud and see what your take is on it. This part is called Unlawful Marriage by Person Authorized to Solemnize Marriage. In section 551:14, if a person authorized to solemnize marriage knowingly joins any persons in a marriage contrary to the provisions of this chapter, he or she shall forfeit for each offense a sum not exceeding $500. The next section says, if any person shall undertake to join others in marriage knowing that he is not lawfully authorized to do so, or knowingly of any legal impediment to propose marriage, he or he shall be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction there shall be punished by imprisonment in county jail of not more than 1 year, and a fine not less than $50, no more than $500, or by both such fine and imprisonment for the direction of the court. Now, if you read the First Amendment and then you read the 14th Amendment, this is where I get a little confused. Aren't we supposed to be a nation of which we have religious freedom? Now I ask you this question, is there anybody in this room by any chance that ever got a license to get baptized? If you did get a license at the county clerk to go get baptized, please raise your hand. If you got maybe
fifth column.
If you ran down to Detroit to the second floor and got a license for the Lord's Supper or communion,
Is that where the Catholic Church is?
or a bar mitzvah, or a bar mitzvah, or any of those things, raise your hand. Because last time I checked, those are rituals of the church. They're ceremonies of the church. But yet, we don't get licenses for those things. But yet, we get licenses for marriages. Now, the rule of thumb goes, well, you know, there's a state interest in marriage. I'm a mediator for a living other than being a pastor. I work with people that get divorced all the time. I understand these things. But ironically, if you have a child tomorrow out of wedlock, the rules that are in place for having a child out of wedlock are, to use a kind of powerful word, more intense. There's more direction in the court, for a friend of the court, for a child born out of wedlock than a child born in wedlock. Things like equal separation of properties and things like that are done in contracts all the time. Post-nups, pre-nups, etc. All those are viable contracts in the state of Michigan. They all exist. There's no denying that. So when we start talking about marriage, when the state says, well, there's a reason why we have to do it, and one of the main reasons we have to do it is because of things like insurance. 2-3 months ago, a federal court decided that, guess what? If you have a domestic partnership that's same sex, not married, in the state of Michigan, guess what? You have a legal binding contract that is enforceable with insurance by your employer. The Attorney General of the state says, I'm not appealing that. So guess what? That issue's gone. So now we're back to why we're doing this. Well, if you read the law, it's pretty obvious to me the law is there not because of anything to do with, well, the vested interest of the state, but nothing more or less than politics and somebody's particular religion. Not necessarily my religion, not necessarily your religion, but somebody's religion, or at least their thoughts of it. The idea of changing the definition of marriage didn't happen until recently, only in the last 20 years. If you read the laws in Michigan, the Michigan compiled laws, the definition of marriage changed. Now what's interesting, most Christians, including me, believe that marriage is a man, a woman, and God in a contract, a covenant. In the state of Michigan and in most states, it is not that. It has been changed. It is no longer a covenant. It is a contract that's binding and is an agenda of, guess what? A man, a woman, the holy state of Michigan. That's what the law actually reads. Holy state of Michigan. That's what it is. Because you know what? They have replaced God. They have become God.
There is a church in Quedlinburg, Germany that is dedicated to Nazis. It's a 12th century church, I'm serious.
Well, it's interesting you should bring up the 12th century.
I'm just saying that when you say holy state of Michigan, I think Nazi church.
Now, most people don't know why marriage laws exist, so I thought I'd give you a quick education of why marriage laws exist. About 1215, the English church, not Romans, we won't blame anything on the Catholics right now. The English said that we're going to have what's called marriage bans. Now, ban sounds like the word banner, or to proclaim. So whenever somebody was going to get married, they would put things out called bans, where somebody would announce that they're getting married. The idea behind it was just that if they were too close of a relationship, they were brother and sister, or first cousins, or something like that, when people know, or if they were in the wrong class of people, one was marrying a class that they shouldn't marry, people would know about it, and they could go to the local priest and go, hey, they can't get married, they're such and such. That was the idea behind banner. We fast forward to the Middle Ages, about the 1600s, marriage licenses existed, and this is what I love. It was not to prohibit marriage, it was to extend marriage out to people that were prohibited to get married, people that were too close in relationship, that were in the wrong class of marriage, etc. That is why marriage licenses actually existed. If we come over to the United States, the reason marriage licenses is for only one purpose: statistics. That was why it existed in the state of Massachusetts. The churches in Massachusetts were doing a bad job of doing statistics, which is interesting because people to get married.
So it's to expand the definition so we can get married.
Well, it was more so that if you looked at common law or Anglican law, the whole idea of it was that the church law said that only certain people can get married. And if you look at both Catholic law and Anglican law, only certain people are allowed to get married. When you get to the Middle Ages, if you will, there was a lot more, and I'm using the word denomination, but the word doesn't actually exist at this time, is that there are different groups that can get married. For instance, a Catholic marrying an Englishman, or a Catholic marrying a Scottish guy that's in a Presbyterian church. Those are the reasons that marriage licenses exist, so that there could be civil marriage as opposed to church marriage.
So it's opening it up to more.
That's right. So it's not to stop somebody from getting married, it's to allow people to get married. So now we move into the 1990s in the United States, and the whole issue is same-sex couples, which is really phenomenal because everybody says, oh, we've changed the definition of marriage. I'm a minister, and I probably shouldn't say this. BS. That's not what happened. The definition of marriage on the books in almost every state in the Union did not even mention gender. Didn't mention gender. Didn't talk about gender. I'm from South Carolina. South Carolina has common law marriage. This is the definition of the common law marriage in the state of South Carolina. Hey, Megan, we're married. Hey, Neil, we're married. Guess what? We have a contract that's verbal. That's to this day, that's the definition of common law marriage in the state of South Carolina. which is going to cause some problems for them when the Supreme Court comes back with same-sex marriage. Because all of a sudden there are going to be a lot more marriages. But having said all that, now I ask you the question, why should any church be told that the minister of their church, the imam of their mosque, or the rabbi of their temple is an agent for the state? I don't remember going to work for the state of Michigan. I don't remember it ever being part of my vocation. In fact, what's ironic, when I worked for the INS as an agent of the INS, I didn't have to do something crazy like this, where I had to be an agent for the state this way. But now that I'm a minister, I have to sign off on the contract. And if I don't sign off the contract properly, I can do a year in jail.
So you have to do whatever the state tells you.
I have to do as far, in order to perform a marriage license, I have to do certain things. One, I have to validate the license as to people being able to get married. So I'm kind of an inspector. We're not first cousins.
But you have to marry people that you otherwise wouldn't.
No. Oh, I do not have to do that. Now, it's funny you should ask me that. Because guess what's going to probably happen after SCOTUS makes this decision?
It'll be enforced.
It'll probably be a situation where we'll have like what happened with the baker who refused to do. So my personal perspective, and I wouldn't consider myself either a liberal or a conservative when it comes to religion, but I will tell you this. Ironically, the coin has two sides. And what you will see is the state that says, guess what? We're not going to do same-sex marriages going, well, guess what? We have to do same-sex marriages because the law says so now at SCOTUS. It's interesting, Oklahoma has already moved to eliminate marriage licenses. They have actually had a representative that's also an attorney, in the Assemblies of God minister, put forth a bill that ends marriage licenses. What they would do is they would go back to the system of having marriage certificate presented to a county clerk, and that county clerk would enter it into the record. There would be no licenses. Now, to make it real simple, a license is this. I'd like to get a building permit. My building permit, here, I'll pay a fee. I'll have somebody go inspect it. If it's good, they'll sign off on me being able to have that building, and use of that building. Guess what? That's marriage licenses in the state of Michigan. You have to have somebody give you a license, give you permission, give you a permit, and then sign off on it. I've never had to do that with a baptism. I've never had to do that with the Lord's Supper. I don't imagine too many rabbis do it with bar mitzvahs. And I don't imagine that imams do it with prayer. But yet we do it with marriage. Now I still don't understand for the life of me why anybody, conservative, liberal, moderate, believes that this is what, when we read the First Amendment of the Constitution, says. It just simply doesn't say it. Now I'm going to go back to Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Last time I checked, the Puritans came here to escape having to live under one particular kind of law. Does anybody know what that law was?
Anglican?
I'm sorry?
Anglican law?
Anglican law. That's right. It's not that they weren't Christians. It's that they were Christians, but they didn't follow Anglican law. The Baptists at Providence, Rhode Island, guess what? They were English, but they didn't want to live under Anglican law. So why did they go to Providence, Rhode Island? So that they can live in their freedom and their liberty. They didn't have to live under it. And guess what? The same is true of Catholics in Maryland. They came to Maryland so that they would not have to live under Anglican law, but they could live under Catholic ideas. Now everybody goes, so what's your point? We are now in 2015 and we are back to living underneath one particular theology. And I have nothing against Anglican law. That's their right, their privilege, their belief. In fact, I love a lot to do with the English church. But the problem is that we are a country of laws and the Constitution. And if we don't protect our freedoms in one direction, it becomes oppression on both sides. And we are quickly waking up to the reality that we're going to oppress a certain group of people and lose freedoms in another direction. And by example, I'll tell you another place that I'm really concerned about. The reality is that if you do not allow people to marry, you are oppressing them. If you turn it around and you tell people that they must perform marriage ceremonies, you are oppressing their religious belief. Okay? There's no state interest here to oppress anybody. There's no valid point and no valid reason to oppress anybody. I'm going to go to the extreme. Polygamy. I live in Dearborn Heights, right outside of it. Okay? If anybody was to tell me or try to convince me that polygamy does not exist in Dearborn Heights, I would gladly invite them to walk with me right down the street or come to Kroger with me one night. Because quite frankly, there are polygamists living in my neighborhood. Okay? Now, like I mentioned earlier, I was an INS worker during the Bush administration, and I was working for the Lutheran Church. And I often get handed cases 24 hours before they came off the plane. And you can only imagine handling political cases 24 hours before they arrive in this country. I was at BWI Airport one night waiting for a family to come off the plane. And they were coming from New York. And before that, they were coming from the Ivory Coast. And as I'm sitting in BWI Airport with some of my colleagues, there were kids coming off of the plane. There's a lot of them. And so by the end of them coming off the plane, there were 22 children that came off the plane. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of children. Well, these were the children of Samuel Doki. Samuel Doki was something similar to what the Speaker of the House is in Liberia. And he had been picked up by the the presidential police of Liberia. Him, his wife, one of his wives, and two bodyguards. They were tortured and beheaded. And then his children ran to the Ivory Coast. And then I got to meet his children. Well, his children, I had to find houses for and everything. That was part of my job. Well, on the way to taking all their children to their house, I had one of Samuel Doki's children in the back seat of my car, taking her to an apartment. And she was complaining. She was upset. You know, Maryland weather can be kind of like Michigan weather. It was about 100 degrees that night. She's complaining. And I'm about 10 years into my marriage, and I said, oh boy, I can tell what's going on. Now remember, I've looked at all the medical records for all these people 24 hours before. And I go to my boss who had come here from Vietnam. I say, Sam, Samaria is pregnant. No. And she is not pregnant. There's no way she's pregnant. She's pregnant. I'm telling you, she's pregnant. No, she's not. She's 6 months pregnant. She's 22 years old. And I said, she's definitely pregnant. She's doing a good job wearing a big jacket over her 6 months in the middle of summer.
Oh, summer.
Yeah. And I'm like, take her to Johns Hopkins. I took her to Johns Hopkins, and I get her in the car, and I said, Samaria, I know you're pregnant. She goes, do not tell my brothers. Different culture. Extremely different culture. She was scared that her brothers would find out that she had gotten pregnant and she was in a refugee camp. So I went to her brother Thomas, and Thomas was about 20 years old, and I explained to Thomas what was going on. And I said, Thomas, I have to ask you a question. You got a lot of brothers and sisters. A lot of them. Are you Muslim? And he laughed. He went, ha ha ha, in his very thick English accent. No, I'm Muslim. He pulled a cross out, and he said, I'm Southern Baptist. How about, because my background's Southern Baptist. And I said, you're Southern Baptist, but how do you have so many brothers and sisters? Oh, 3 wives, concubines.
It's in the Bible.
I'm like, yes it is. So I said, you gotta be kidding me. He goes, no, he goes, I'm like, what, polygamy? He goes, yes, at our class in Liberia, polygamy is acceptable. Okay. And so, when you hear somebody say traditional marriage, I want to say to them, let me grab my Bible. I tell you what, see, this is half of it. Split it down the middle and read everything this direction. Start with Moses, and when you get to Jesus, let me know, because every single prophet, with the exception of 2 of them, had multiple wives. So what's traditional marriage? Oh, well, that's not what we mean by traditional marriage. Oh, you mean that Bible verse in Genesis where it talks about a man shall leave his mother and stay with his wife, and this would be a marriage. Except, guess what? Adam didn't have a mother. So where are you going with this Bible verse? There's a problem here. That's a problem. And guess what? There was no preacher there either except for God, because it's just Adam and Eve, right? So you got a little bit of a problem. Oh, guess what?
They didn't have a Lord.
Guess what? King David and King Solomon wrote those things called Proverbs, Psalms, the Wisdom. All those wisdom books in the Bible where it talks about a wonderful wife is a great thing to find in life. Does anybody know that King Solomon and King David both had so many wives that they could probably have one wife for every day of the week? King Solomon, I always get them confused which one is which. King Solomon had 300 wives and 700 concubines, and King David had 25 wives, and we don't really know what his concubine was. So the men that wrote all these Bible verses about what a great wife was had more than one wife. But yet, guess what? That's what when we talk about traditional marriage, we refer to these guys. So where did this definition come from? Well, that's kind of, go ahead.
I know where that definition came from. I'll use an example. People talk about the tradition of men having short hair. Mm-hmm. That means in the time I've been alive, it has always been done this way.
That's right.
So in the 60s when men started growing their hair long, that was horrendous. But if you went back to prior to the Civil War, long hair was very common. So they're talking about a very narrow window, what they're aware of. 1 or 2 generations
well,
is what they're really talking about.
Martin Luther King talked about, excuse me, not King, Martin Luther, the German that gave us Lutheran churches, talked about polygamy being okay and acceptable. He was not there to judge. So we're not talking that many centuries ago. But I want to emphasize this point, and this has been kind of off the subject. What does any of this have to do with the state of Michigan? Why do they have a vested interest in deciding who I do a wedding ceremony? What is their interest in? Are you going to argue that it's insurance when no longer is that the case according to the federal judge? That issue's gone. You want to talk about Social Security? Guess what? Serial monogamous would beg to differ with you. If you've been married more than once, guess what? They have an interest in Social Security. Go ahead.
I would say the only interest I can come up with is the politicians want to get reelected, and so we really need to ask all these people that are insisting that the politicians have the laws this way, why do you think the state has an interest in this? Because the politicians, we know what they want. They want to get reelected.
Well, I have an interesting take on that. Before any of this happened in the last 6 months, when we looked at the divorce case, the guy who was the deciding judge was appointed by President Bush, okay? And he came down on the side of same-sex marriage, okay? Now we have this going before the Supreme Court of the United States, a person that was put on the bench by President Bush and Ronald Reagan is probably going to come down on the same side of same-sex marriage, which is ironic, but here's why, well, we believe that Justice Kennedy, who got rid of all the sodomy laws, is going to come down on the side of it. And the Supreme Court Chief Justice, Judge Roberts, is probably going to be the sixth vote. We bet 50-50 chance that he might come down on that side, which would mean we would have a lopsided majority decision on this one, with 2 of the people being so-called conservative or appointed by conservative. But having said that, when we listen to Bill Schuett and Governor Rick Snyder talk about the politics of all this, what's interesting is up until about 2 months ago, they were like, we have to defend the state of Michigan's people's right. Well, you know, now we should let the Supreme Court decide and be on the side of history. What does that mean? Oh, I don't want to lose and look like an idiot. That's what it's come down to. Lately, it's about politics as opposed to what is really there. This is the third one, which I think is really interesting, is just that it's a base issue, which is the most frightening thing in the world to me, because this is not about right, wrong, politics, etc. It's a clique, a small group of people that are going to control things. and trust me, when 2016 comes along, and same-sex marriage is the law, will Rick Snyder be arguing that he has to defend the law? I don't know. But I know he won't want to be on the wrong side of history anymore.
I want to make 3 points, and I believe that we should be concerned about these 3 points that I'm about to make on the other side. Okay? And I've heard it for years. Number 1, we have to be on the side of supporting, I believe, private discrimination. Okay? I.e., you brought up the bakery. We believe as libertarians that a baker should be able to tell whomever their customer, whoever walks into their bakery, no, they will not serve that customer or those customers. We have to stand up for that bakery and say we will support you, sir or ma'am or couple, in your fight to determine whom you will serve.
No shirt, no shoes.
Right. So, okay. Or based on race or whatever. But we have to be consistent. Support consistency. Number 1. Number 2, a lot of pastors are worried that they are going to be mandated, okay, to marry against their religion. And they don't want to do that. And we have to, again, defend them, stand out there, protest, whatever, in their support. And 3, the third one is to be consistent on this issue of a mother or father marrying their adult child or children, or 2 brothers marrying each other. That can happen in New Jersey right now. That's legal. We have to be consistent and defend those who are being put upon by a mob rule philosophy that you must do this because we demand it.
Yeah, I want to speak to especially the first 2.
Is that your what was your 3rd point?
That was 3, yeah.
I want to speak to when I first started into this, everybody was saying, well, you're okay with incest, you're okay with bestiality, and I'm like, well, I think you must know me really well. And,
How did you know?
How did you know? But it's kind of like this. Nobody's asking for the state of Michigan to okay things that are actually already illegal. People say, well, what about same-sex? Sodomy was struck down 6 years ago across the United States, so it's no longer illegal. Okay, but if you want to talk about incest, or you want to talk about bestiality, those things are criminal acts that are, nobody's advocating for child abuse or any of those things. There's a stark difference in that. But having said that, here's the thing that I am very adamant at. I am not suing the state of Michigan because I simply want to be able to be allowed to do same-sex marriage or have somebody else do polygamy. I believe that clergy, I don't care whether you're a Baptist that doesn't want to remarry somebody, or a Catholic doesn't want to marry somebody that's been divorced as a Catholic, etc. Churches, clergymen should have the right to marry and not marry. It is a two-sided coin. I believe that's the way it should be. And if somebody starts saying, well, you want to force churches to marry same-sex individuals, nothing is further from the truth. If a Unitarian Universalist church tomorrow wants to marry, a guy and a girl in the same service, that's fine. But if a Baptist church, if Northridge Church or some other church does not want to remarry somebody, that's their right too. As long as you're not breaking some law that has to do with either fraud or abuse to consenting adults, I'm good. That's the way it should be.
Okay. To piggyback off about that comment, who is aware of what the mayor of Houston tried to do in the past 4 or 5 months? The mayor of Houston wanted to confiscate the sermons of pastors who spoke against same-sex marriages. That was frightening. That was me to demand discernment of pastors. So those types of fears are out there, and we have to be out front and challenge that types of politician, types of government moves, and stand with those pastors or anybody like that to stop that type of thing. I mean, there are fears out there like that. So I believe that we as a party and others like us can be out front to stop that kind of stuff, and I believe that we should. Let's go.
So I'm going to wrap it up. Go ahead.
Okay.
No, I just have a question. So the kind of remedy that you've talked about, I want to make sure I understand it, is that instead of having these licenses that we currently have, that's our system of marriage, right? Instead, what we actually have are other agencies such as like a church or, I don't know, a peacekeeper or something married someone, and they just keep a registry of those who are married.
It can be entered in vital
Used to be
statistics.
the church.
Yeah.
The church is
Churches
absolutely
keep
a registry of everybody.
So what? I'll give you for instance, like up until I guess in the 1920s or so, in Massachusetts, what they did was the church kept the records, marriage records, birth records, etc. And they had vital statistics, kept the record in parallel. In other words, they kept them at the same time. So you had a parallel record being kept. And so you had two databases essentially of records. But the idea was this was only for statistical purposes. It was not for entitlements, etc., or anything like that. If somebody claimed to be married, it was understood that they were married. Having said that, if you can find someplace in the Bible where marriage licenses exist, please come over to my house and show it to me, because it doesn't exist. It's just simply not there.
I would think that the source of these laws, though, was the idea that you have to have certain social norms in order to have a powerful society that will be successful in war.
Interesting concept.
In other words, you have to organize. Now,
Why is that the goal?
Well, I'm not saying it should be, but this is where it comes from. People have a theory at various times, that the nuclear family is the best way to organize people to raise soldiers.
Well, here's the
That
question.
sounds very Prussian.
Well, that's the history of the world is war.
If you look at all the wars, I never even thought about that. But if you look at all the wars, up until the 1990s is when we started to change the definition of marriage. And when I say we started to change the definition of marriage, nobody talked about gender or numbers or any of those things until the 1990s. So it's not. If somebody says we're changing traditional marriage, I would argue just the opposite. It's not anybody changing traditional marriage. This thing is 2.5 kids ever. I mean, it didn't exist. It just didn't exist. So, people talked up about divorce in the 1950s.
That was probably the reason for suppressing homosexuality, too.
Somebody
They thought that
I can go back and look at Greek sculptures and go, oh yeah, I guess homosexuality
A lot
didn't
of this,
exist.
a lot of this had more to do with the disposition of family property and the division of property and alliances between families. I've never heard this war business before in my life.
You haven't read a history book, then you don't know
I
about war.
went to a history.
But I wouldn't-
The whole purpose of collectivism is war and
I'm sorry,
winning.
I totally disagree with that. That is not the basis of marriage law. It's usually family dynasties marrying. It's the disposition of property in a primogeniture
Even that, for what
environment
purpose is
where
that?
the oldest son gets the property, and the non-division, the preservation
To
of
amass
marriage.
wealth, you can defend your
And that's
property.
why in Venice you had courtesans and prostitutes, because they wanted to preserve the property only through the oldest, and you had second sons or nothing. It has nothing to do with this war stuff. It's totally red herring.
You only defend your property through force, don't you?
We're taking it away.
That's why I don't have all the time in the world, but I wanted to ask you to do me a favor. One, I'm going to read something from y'all's platform.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. State platform.
What?
State or the federal, or the
National or the state?
state?
State platform?
This is from the National Libertarian Platform.
Okay.
He's on your page.
Yeah.
It says, the first is 1.3, privacy. Libertarians advocate individual privacy and government transparency. We are committed to ending government practice spying on everyone. We support, I love that, everyone.
Yeah.
We support the rights recognized by the Fourth Amendment to secure in our persons, home, property, and communication protection from unreasonable search and seizures. These include held by third parties, such as email, medical, and library record. Then section 1.4, personal relationship, sexual orientation, preference, gender, and gender identity. Y'all are way ahead of the curve here.
Yes,
Should have no impact on the government's treatment of an individual, such as in the current marriage, child custody, adoption, immigration, or military service. Government does not have the authority to define.
Right.
And here's the next word.
Right.
License. Or restrict personal relationship. Consenting adults should have to be free to choose their own sexual practices and personal relationships.
Right.
So now I'm suing the state of Michigan based upon that exact word.
Cool.
Okay? I'm going to ask y'all for your support.
Yeah.
And I have your
Yes.
support.
Yes.
And I have your support
Yes.
to do just that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Got it.
It's not even controversial in this group.
I promise you I'm not for bestiality.
Membership.
You may have lost one or
what
two.
goes on in your barn is your business. I don't want to know about it.
You should, you should attend the state convention and ask for
Yeah.
a motion.
Yeah, we were gonna hit him up for that.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
So,
Yes,
so
there will be a resolution.
I'm curiosity as a group, and I don't know how y'all operate as a group in Wayne County, but is there some way that y'all can actually say that y'all support me?
Yes.
So like, somebody says, well, who supports you? So we understand that the Christian right does not support you when you're a minister, or I got, the president of a denomination just told me yesterday that he would support us. So,
I want two things in regard to that. One is, most of the people tonight, and I'm very happy we have people from outside Wayne County. I'd say about half the people at least probably aren't from Wayne County.
okay.
Second of all, the state party is having a conference call meeting on this Sunday,
Oh.
and so we could actually vote as an LEC in favor. And I did get your statement emailed, and now that I have something concrete, I can share that with the LEC, and they can vote on that specific statement.
Okay.
Or Mary could just say it tonight too. She speaks
Yeah,
for the party.
Mary is the chair of the party, of the state party,
Well, leave it to the chair. I'm good.
and
She
she's
has
a great.
broad latitude.
What?
You have broad latitude. Broad
I'm
powers.
abroad too, yeah.
The benevolent dictator.
Now, I guess what we could ask
No,
is, I mean,
no.
is there anyone who disagrees in the Wayne County party?
I agree wholeheartedly, and
So-
I will.
Raise
support
the chair
you.
of
I
Wayne
want
County.
to support you.
You got my support from West Michigan.
In fact,
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Okay.
support you.
Is there anybody that has any, I'm curious, I understand everybody has different arguments about what marriage is or what marriage isn't, and what relationships are, all that kind of stuff. Does anybody have a disagreement in the fundamental view that this is not government's place to be?
You're preaching to the choir here. You're in the wrong place for an argument.
There's people here who don't believe anything is in the sphere of government, period.
I'm looking
You
for
noticed
somebody
that,
to say,
did you?
oh, well, we should let them do this. And I'm going,
We argue about other stuff.
No, we don't, yeah, minutia on other subjects, we do get into.
We'll argue over commas.
No, I do.
There you go.
But I did have one
For this.
question. I did have one question.
Okay.
Because when I was campaigning for governor, I did bring this up. And a lot of people, because I explained to people that, every day, thousands of couples go down to City Hall and apply for a marriage license. Why? Because a license is the government's permission to do something which is otherwise illegal.
that's right.
Marriage is illegal. That's from Black's Law Dictionary.
That's right. I was about to say, that came from Black's.
Marriage is illegal.
It certainly is in a certain circumstance.
That's kind of what you were saying, though. You were saying
And it
marriage
sh- and
laws
it
were to
shouldn't
expand the definition for exemptions.
But there are 1,100 laws. And I looked them up.
Wow.
Federal, states, that pertain to marriage. Yes, that have marriage in the laws. So
That's
now
the
we have to
problem.
unravel this because it's been closely woven fabric. And now we have to
start unraveling it, because it goes, marriage is on everything as far as laws go, because when you marry somebody, your relationship to the state changes as far as estate planning, child care, taxes, a myriad of things.
And it's not, and the thing to me that's strange is that, people go back to the Supreme Court rule that said that the corporation is an individual, which is an interesting finding. But a marriage is the death of a human being, because, and I hate to be so negative, but it is, because guess what? You're not,
We all die a
if
little
you file taxes,
Marriage is your death.
you have like 4 choices. File married separately, file head of household, etc. But guess what? The head of household one, if you file head of household and you have children, and the other one person can't file head of household, it hurts the other person in terms of like what their tax return will be like. If you file, there's a penalty to be married under the tax code several times. They've been trying to get rid of some of them, but some of them still exist. I mean, it's bizarre, but it's like if you get married, part of you dies. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but reality is that it is what it is under the law.
Wait a minute, Mary, no taxes. And the so-called, well, yeah. One thing at a time. I would love no taxes.
Did you want your thing back?
And other things too, things like social security. Like when Todd Corson brought this up. Todd, in his course about Social Security, the guy had multiple wives. Now he dies, and now all the wives are suing the state because, hey, we each need an individual portion. Okay, Todd, is the problem with polygamy that you're having, or is it the problem with Social Security here?
I have to ask you this question because I brought up polygamy. I think it's a really interesting thing. There is a vested interest in the state concerning marriage.
Yes, money.
And it is called food stamps and entitlements. And here is the big nightmare in the state of Michigan. If you have non-licensed marriages in the state of Michigan that have to do with polygamy, but yet the state recognizes unwed children from unwed marriages, and they're actually wedded children. Their parents wedded in a mosque. But yet these children are getting food stamps because their parents get food stamps. And they're not claiming their father's income as maybe $250 million that's in the next house over. You have huge fraud going on. And people go, well, now you're picking on Muslims. No, no, I'm picking on the system because quite frankly, the system enables that not to happen with just any particular religion, but with all religions. It's saying that we're going to hurt marriage.
Doesn't food stamps and welfare go by household?
Go by household. But I work in the system.
Or not.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And so the problem with it is that you can define a household. You can have a mom, a father, 2 children, and a grandmother there. And if grandmother is making $100,000 a year, the poor people can claim that they're not part of that household even if they share the same address. So it works. They are actually hurting marriage by saying somehow that we should not somehow be able to have what I call statistical knowledge of a marriage as opposed to like power structure of a marriage. Because you're actually telling people, don't be married, don't put yourself out as married, because guess what? Then we're going to hurt you tax-wise, we're going to hurt you with your entitlements, we're going to hurt you in all these different directions. And instead of enabling individuals to grow and to become better citizens, and I think that's like a prime in and of itself. We are hurting people that are poor and enabling them to live kind of like at their needs with our government. I say, don't be honest about who you are. Don't be that.
How do you say you're not in the same household if you're in the same house?
Define a household. Define a household.
There are ways.
That's the problem. There's no definition.
So right now, marriage certificates are not lawful?
No.
Has to have the license.
Has to be licensed.
In fact, there are a lot of, there's some pastors in the church who will not sign a marriage certificate. Go back to the state because they believe in separation.
I thank y'all for your time and appreciate it. If there's anything you can do.
Brian? Let me know when you want help cornering him before we leave.
Yeah.
Are you having another snippet talk at some point? Sorry? Are you speaking another?
Joe, got all these people here.
One is